Welcome to the Public Access Channel. I am Javier Castillo. As you know, I mentioned in other programs, I am from Nicaragua originally, and my country of birth is under the worst dictatorship that I could have imagined in my years of life. It's been said that for years the Somoza family was a dictatorship. I laugh at that because what Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas are doing, it is one of the worst dictatorships that you can imagine. Today, I have as my guest, Alvaro Somoza. Yes, he's a member of the Somoza family that ruled Nicaragua until 1979. His grandfather was president, his father Luis was president, his uncle Anastasio was president, and he was deposed supposedly by a revolution, as we call it, but it was basically because the United States, under President Jimmy Carter, gave their support to get rid of Somoza. Jimmy Carter was sadly very ill-advised, and Alvaro can tell us more about all these things in what happened in Nicaragua. Alvaro, microphones are yours.
Yes, how are you, Javier? And thank you very much to the public that's watching or listening to this program. I have a few comments to say first. Javier says it was not a dictatorship. Well, I have my issues with that, even though I'm a member of the Somoza family, because my father had an interview on, I think, CBS when he was a lame duck president, right before he went to meet John Kennedy in San Jose, Costa Rica in 1963. You remember, right?
Yes.
The Central American presidents met with Mr. Kennedy in San Jose in April of 1963. But before that, he gave an interview to CBS where they asked him about being a dictator and so forth. And he says, listen, there is no doubt that we have certain characteristics of a dictatorship because we rule with a little bit of discipline to a nation that is not adequately educated or has enough culture to understand the benefits of democracy. And he said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, even Henry L. Stimson, when he reported to Calvin Coolidge, when he withdrew the Marines from Nicaragua in the late 20s or early 30s, he said, the Nicaraguan people are not ready for democracy. Henry L. Stimson. He didn't mean we need a dictatorship. He meant there was no culture in our civilization in Central America for democracy. Democracy requires commitment from people to obey the law and to act on behalf of the whole people, not just the one person. So Dad said, are you going to tell me, he said to the interviewer from CBS, are you going to tell me that the democracy in Mobile, Alabama is the same as the one in Brattleboro, Vermont? Obviously, two different sorts of people, two different sorts of thought. You know, we're much more towards the South. We're much more conservative in our views. So there are characteristics of what Americans in certain parts of the country would consider a dictatorship, but it wasn't, because there was a very legitimate and vibrant party at the time called the Liberal Party. And I don't mean liberal in the sense of socialist, communist, left, no. Liberal in the sense of freedom. The predominant thought was, you know, let's give the people the freedom to choose their own values. And that's the basis of democracy. And from that we'll build. And that's how it happened. And the Liberal Party provided enormous advancements that some of my relatives were involved in. That is one thing, but in reality, it was a whole country that became liberal. And you have to just look at the advancements for example, in the 40 years that my family was involved during the 50 years of the Liberal Party, we created the Social Security system. We passed the law that allowed women to vote. We passed the minimum wage law. We passed the central bank law. We passed the law that allowed savings and loans to exist. We developed the best development bank in Latin America, in Central America, which was called Infonac. We developed the Central American Integration Common Market concept. And I could go on and on and on, but all these things gave people, not to mention the physical development of the nation, a network of roads, railroad, airlines, shipping, the cattle business boomed, the cotton business boomed, the economy was out. Imagine this, between 1950 and 1970, the Nicaraguan economy had a gross internal product every year. It grew by 20% on the average for 20 consecutive years, from 1950 to 1970. It's in the books. You can look it up. See, unfortunately, what you have today, Javier, with the national press, with somebody like Trump, who I'm not endorsing, I'm just saying what they're doing with Trump, which is lying, misrepresenting, they're not reporting facts. That is what happened in Latin America towards any government that wasn't on the left. The journalism, and I can give you Alan Writing of the New York Times, Anderson of the New York Times. I can give you dozens of writers that were supposed to be objective journalists, and in fact, they were propagandists of the left. So that's the story.
Well, now we have a situation in which probably some of our viewers have read that Nicaragua, the government had put in jail basically every opposition member that said, I want to run for president. They found ways to put him in jail. And suddenly, on February the 9th, there's an airplane leaving Nicaragua with 222 political prisoners. Many of them were just put in jail because they couldn't find a relative that they were looking for. I can tell you a situation of a distant relative of mine, name is Gabriel Lopez del Carmen. They were looking for his mother, and he was at his mom's house taking care of a person that his mom was looking after. When they couldn't find her, they took him and they hid him on the first day. They had him incommunicated for days and days. And then they accused him of a conspiracy with no reason, no witness, nothing, and put him in jail, kept him in jail until he was released on February the 9th, thanks, I guess, to something happened between the United States Embassy and the government of Nicaragua. Who knows what transpired that Ortega allowed this group of people, including Catholic priests, because there's been a persecution against the Catholic Church, and Bishop Alvarez was also a prisoner on his house, and he refused to be sent out away from Nicaragua. So they put him directly in jail immediately, with no trial or found some people that will testify against him. But that has been the situation that we're trying to figure out what kind of agreement the United States had with the governor of Ortega. Then days later, there's a group of other Nicaraguan individuals including you, your name came out that you were taking away supposedly your citizenship. They confiscated your properties, and
For
they
the
call
second
you
time.
they call you a traitor of Nicaragua. So
In fact, they actually went and, well, we have to explain to the audience. The U.S. government helped negotiate a deal with the dictatorship that allowed the U.S. government to send an airplane to Managua. Imagine that it left the United States full of fuel, landed in Nicaragua, stood at the Air Force ramp. The people were brought, 222 prisoners, political prisoners, were brought to the ramp where the airplane was. They didn't service a plane, they didn't, nothing. Everything was sent from the United States just because we didn't want to risk people getting poisoned while they were in a U.S. airplane. So the U.S. government sent the plane stocked with fuel, pilots, service, food, water, you name it. And they landed. The pilots never left the plane. Nobody ever got off the plane. People just got in, and the plane took off and came to Washington, D.C. 4 hours later. The interesting thing about it is people have to understand the Sandinistas are a legitimate dictatorship, totally controlling, completely controlling every aspect of your lives. And so if let's say Javier and I have a conversation like we're having right now, and we are critical of the Sandinista government. Well, let's just say that Javier gets on a plane or wants to get on a plane to fly Miami, Managua. He cannot fly, and the airline is forbidden to allow him to fly unless they send his passport on internet to Managua, and the government of Managua will decide whether he's allowed to come or not. This is a guy from Nicaragua who was born there and has every right to egress and exit his country. In Nicaragua, no, he has to be approved. And if by any chance Javier decides to, or the government allows him in, nothing precludes them from taking the passport away from him upon landing, entering the country legally, but they remove his passport. Now Javier cannot leave the country, which means they shut him down. That's all it is. It's nothing but a way of protecting themselves from free speech, which is one of the biggest enemies they have. They will not allow people to criticize them, to tell the truth. This is why we're all in exile, and thank God for the internet, because we have now social networks through which we communicate and get people informed. But this is a country where 45 years ago, not only did you have the freedom to go, imagine that we had people who were literally declared communists come to Nicaragua publicly demanding the resignation of Uncle Thatcher. General Somoza was president at the time. And he never touched them. Let him talk. They came in. I happened to be, I was running to the farm, and I used to be a pilot, so I had to go to the airport to catch my plane and fly to a farm. And this group of 12 anti-government people flew in from Costa Rica, Los 12. And so I ran into their march all along the highway, and the troop of people, there may have been 15,000 people there. The government never touched them, allowed them to come in, say whatever. The people that used to go to Cuba and come back through Costa Rica or through Mexico, never touched, never jailed, anything. They may have been questioned because Nicaragua was very careful with people that went to Cuba, but never, anything like that. So the problem we have now is that the world does not want to see what Ortega is like. This is a man who just ruptured relationships with the Vatican because the Pope, upon addressing the issue of one of his monsignors being in jail, and not just a regular jail. This is, they call it little hell, infernillo, because that's where they torture people. And I happen to know a lot of people in Nicaragua, and a lot of people call me. I have an organization which is called the Nicaraguan Freedom Alliance, right here in the United States. I am its sole representative. And obviously, I have over 8,000 affiliates from all over the world, but mainly from Nicaragua. And they tell me that they already saw Monsignor Alvarez limping in the jail, which means they're hurting him. So the Pope said, well, if they throw a Monsignor in jail, they have to be unbalanced. And for that statement, the Sandinistas, Ortega and his wife, Murillo, cut relationships with the Vatican. They already cut relationship with the OAS. They are hoping to create a problem by being allies with Iran, Russia, and China, plus North Korea. Those are his biggest allies, right there. And
China is not helping, because I just read 3 days ago that some loan or some money is coming from the United States. China hasn't put a penny on that.
Javier, none of those countries have the wherewithal to do it. First, by logistics, and then by their own economic difficulties. And lastly, the United States is not our enemy. The United States is one of the most gracious countries in the world. With all the mistakes the bureaucrats in the State Department make, is still the greatest nation on earth for people being persecuted by dictatorships like Ortega. The United States still our biggest trading partner. Over 50% of Nicaragua's exports come to the United States. Over 27% of Nicaragua's raw materials imported into Nicaragua come from the United States. The United States houses over 1 million Nicaraguans in this country. I mean, Ortega is absolutely bonkers. He's a psychopath. He has no education. He never graduated from high school. The people around him are penny ante, ignorant people who have a lot of anger in their gut, and all they do is spew fire and hurt people. Unfortunately, with President Biden, we're not getting any results. But luckily, we're working in Congress with some, even Democrats who are in Congress, like Bob Menendez and Mark Green and people like that, who are helping the Republicans in ousting Ortega. And we'll make it. It's just a matter of time.
I mean, what he said, basically, the Pope was very clear. He said basically he's mentally unstable. If we say in good Nicaraguan, I'm going to say in Spanish so people understand, es un descachimbado mental. That is a word. That is a way we use it in colloquial Spanish about when you say somebody is crazy. Descachimbado mental. That's what it is. Unfortunately, the woman on his side is the worst because she is a witch. And when I say a witch, I'm not saying it just colloquially, that she really is a witch that prays to Satan. No question about it. The woman is not.
I think, first of all, you need to explain to the audience, Rosario Murillo, that's her name, short nickname Chayo. Chayo Murillo is a very angry person. She has a lot of social resentment in her gut. And unfortunately, people know certain details. For example, Ortega, facts about Ortega, okay? He never graduated from high school. He never shot one bullet in the revolution. He just happened to be the figurehead because he was one of the early ones in the Sandinista movement. And the irony is that everything they did is based on lies. They talk about this guerrilla called Sandino. Sandino would turn over his grave if he was aware of what the Sandinistas are doing with his name.
I said that.
This guy, first of all, he was a member of the Liberal Party, and he was a soldier. He fought against the conservatives and did a great job doing so. But under the auspices of Henry L. Stimson and the U.S. government, a peace treaty was drawn, which was referred to as Pino Negro, the black thorn tree. And in that agreement, everybody was supposed to depose their weapons, and the new government under General Moncada was to take over, and who was a liberal on the side of Sandino. Well, Sandino did not depose his weapons. He went up to the northern section of Nicaragua. You know how we call the South, but we refer to the South as, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, the southern states. And so in the northern territory, it used to be called, it's still called Las Segovias. Well, Sandino went to Las Segovias and started literally being abandoned. He would steal from farmers and people who had certain amount of money to keep his people, his warriors, fed and dressed and whatnot. But it was all under the auspices of, weapons. I know, Javier, you don't know this fact, but my mom had a butler at home. And that guy, his name was Ramon Rivera. He was 8 years old, helping his mother with these clay pots that used to fill with water down by the rivers. The water at the time in the rivers was very clean. It was very pristine. It was from fresh water from the mountains. And so they were filling the jars with water, and the boy would carry one and the mom would carry the other when the Sandino's troop came upon them. And they put the pots down on the ground, and she said, we need to get your chickens and your pigs and whatever food you have for my troops. And she said, listen, I'm a single woman. I've got my son. I don't have any other way of helping myself. Please don't do that. They shot her dead in front of the 8-year-old boy. That 8-year-old boy eventually became mom's butler at home. And he told us a story verbatim. This is Sandino. This is after who the Sandinistas call themselves. They have, of course, they immediately changed the story to this wonderful man who was a great leader who wanted to get the Americans out. It was baloney. The Americans were there helping the peace treaty, and they left immediately after the signage of the treaty. So the Sandinistas are an evil force in Nicaragua. They've done more damage. And imagine this. During the Sandinista government, inflation was 33,000%. I mean, you have to understand, in 1978, which was the last time I did it, I used to take my office staff, which were, I think there were like 18 people. I used to take them to a certain food establishment very near my house in the local market called Mercado Oriental. And this lady had a great soup and service and whatnot. And so we used to take my people there. Imagine that every single one of them would have a juice, a big tall glass of whatever fruit juice they wanted, a soup, and a main meal. That was 3 Cordobas, which was less than 50 cents per dollar for a full meal per person. Today, you won't touch that for 120, which is like $4. That's the reality of what the Sandinistas have done. And of course, $4 after the adjustments of the money. If you put it in terms of the money of 1978, it would be more like $40 when you think of the inflation they caused. Nicaragua was such stable economy that the Cordoba, the Nicaraguan Cordoba, was declared as an international currency. I personally had an example. I used to fly, like I said, I used to be a pilot. And I flew with a Chilean friend of mine, Raúl Izquierdo, from Managua to Miami. But I wasn't supposed to fly. I just used to like it. And he had a beautiful airplane. And he said, listen, I'm flying to Miami. You want to come along? And I said, sure. And since I knew people here in Miami, I had a brother living here. And I said, I'll go stay with him, or I just, use credit cards and stay in a hotel, whatnot. I only had Cordobas in my pocket. And I went in the airport. And he said, you don't need to change this. We accept Cordobas all over the place. It was a currency accepted like euro, like the European euros, like the US dollar. It was on par with those at 7 Cordobas to $1. That's reality.
Well, when the exchange rate was 7, for all my life was 7 to 1, 7 Cordobas for $1. And then suddenly, the government was forced to devaluate the Cordoba in front of the dollar, and it became 10 to 1. I happened to be working at the
very end of the
very
revolution, about 8 months before we left.
And I happened to be working at the central bank. I have returned getting my master's with the scholarship of the central bank had. And suddenly Dr. Roberto Inser called me and my boss and 2 others to his office and says, well, we used to have exchange control back in the 50s. Now we have to have control. So they gave us the instructions, put the regulations, what it will be. And I wrote those regulations. Then people had to register when you have, debts abroad, like credit cards and all that, so you can get the dollars to make you payments. You will be surprised. You will be surprised the number of Nicaraguans that have credit card for that Miami store. What it's Macy's, the famous the Miami store.
It was Jordan Marsh, J.C. Penney's.
Well,
I can't remember.
The one that they had in Miami, it was like a department store, and then it became. ¿Cómo? Burdines. My wife is just telling me.
Burdines, yes.
Burdines. You will be surprised of the number of Nicaraguans that have credit cards, in Burdines. That's how our economy was well accepted, as you mentioned it. And then came these Sandinistas, and they just completely destroyed the economy. I mean, my mother was left. She had some investments when they had the Operation Bert, as they call it, that Cordoba, you had to go with a big bag of Cordobas to get the little bag in the supermarket. And then suddenly they evaluated completely the currency. And my mother was left basically with nothing on the deposit that she had in the banks. So,
well, I think what you're saying and what I'm saying is that to the American public that you are speaking to, we need to explain that we can't measure every country that the United States has relationship with the same ruler that you measure the U.S. government. It's impossible. Nicaragua was a very small country. Imagine this. It was a country the size of the state of Illinois or the state of New York, more or less. And it only had, at that time, less than 4 million people total. Today, it's about 6.5 million people in the same size country, which means the potential for agricultural and industrial development is phenomenal. But the Sandinistas never worked towards that. They worked towards enriching themselves and becoming totally millionaires without any justification. They're looting the country. What Javier mentioned, Operation Bertha was it was basically the night that the Sandinistas became very wealthy. How? Well, they knew they were going to devalue the currency. So for about a week or two before, the top dogs of the Sandinista movement went around collecting as many dollars as they could from everywhere they could. And they devalued. Oh, and they also purchased the white lines from stores like refrigerators, kitchens, stoves, etc. And they controlled all the hard assets that they could find, and then they went in overnight. They devalued the money, like I said, like 20,000% overnight. And so somebody that had, say $100,000, like your mother or like mine or somebody, found themselves with basically $2,000 in their account instead of 100,000. But the Sandinistas that had the dollars, the very next day went in there and purchased hard assets, buildings, properties, and the like. The Sandinistas are very corrupt, sick people, and unfortunately, Ortega is a lazy person. He doesn't really do anything. He watches television most of the time. He reads things that have to do with the Cold War of the.
Well, he is. We have a little technical trouble up in Alvaro's image froze, but basically what they're doing is Ortega doesn't do anything. It's his wife, Rosario Murillo, the ones that controls the country, because at one time his stepdaughter, Soy la América Narváez, accused him in court that Ortega raped her when she was a child. And his wife, Rosario Murillo, instead of supporting her daughter, she went and supported Ortega. And from that point on, she got control of him. Apparently, I have lost Alvaro Somoza. I'm going to make a pause to see if he can come back. Well, apparently we have some technical difficulties with the signal from Alvaro Somoza, so I will continue a little bit, let's call it like a part one of a program, try to get with him and we can continue our discussion. But basically what is happening right now in Nicaragua is, like we were discussing, the Pope called him a mentally unstable individual. So they broke relations with the Vatican. They have the Bishop Alvarez in jail, probably being tortured. And then we have all these individuals that were released from jail, but they made them loose. They declared that they're not Nicaraguans anymore, that they confiscated their properties, even their Social Security pensions, which, like in the United States, you pay from your money, from your salary, you contribute to the Social Security to get a pension. It's not that the government is giving it to you. But in this case, the Sandinistas, the Ortega government, has confiscated also that pension plan. And when the people go and look for their check or payments, your name is not on the record anymore. That's the kind of theft that they are doing in Nicaragua. On the other hand, right now, from the people that were freed and they came to the United States, there's basically all the candidates of the opposition that were put in jail. And somehow there's also a movement that they call themselves Movimiento Reformador Sandinistas. These are members of the Sandinista party that are against Ortega. And right now, some of them are in conversations with members of the Biden administration. They're trying to put the image that they are the opposition of Nicaragua, which is not the case. Because some of these individuals, like this writer, Ramirez Mercado, he was asked, will you repent of what you did when you were part of that? Because he was part of the confiscations. And now he's a writer, he's well recognized. That's a good thing about that, he can write. But he was vice president of Ortega when the confiscations took place. And he went ahead. And now when he's been asked, he's like, will you say, I'm sorry, I repent of what I did? He says, no, he's not repenting of anything that he did. And these are the people that are in conversation with the Biden administrations. And who knows what is going to happen right now in Nicaragua. On the other hand, the Humberto Ortega, the brother of Daniel Ortega, is also suddenly start figuring out, but he and Rosario Murillo don't see each other. So he's saying that his brother is wrong, that the Bishop Alvaro should be free. And who knows what's going on at this time in Nicaragua, that basically probably the only solution will be that the army of Nicaragua takes some action against Ortega and his witch wife. That is a reality. We have to accept. When the Soviet Union ended, as it was known, communists didn't disappear. The army remained. So probably some of the military people might have to take action. Not necessarily the ones at the very top, because those are sitting with Ortega, basically. But there should be lower ranks that can probably take some action. Well, I'm going to stop here and probably try to arrange a second part so we can continue talking with Alvaro Somoza. I am Javier Castillo. Have a good day.